Hello?
Hey Webster, can you hear
Hey,
me?
yeah, gotcha.
Oh, perfect. All right, great, good. No technical glitches. Awesome. So thanks for being able to come on the show.
Yeah, are we on right now?
We are. So I'm gonna
Oh,
take.
okay. No,
Yeah, I didn't give
pretty
you much
roll.
warning there, did I?
It's okay.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for coming on tonight's
Yeah,
show, everybody. We have Webster Colcord on again tonight. Now you were on just the other week talking about some stuff, and then I heard about Scott Nordlund, who had just
yeah,
passed away.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I mean it's kind of like a shock. I mean he was sort of somebody that worked at Wolverton Studios for a lot of years, and is like basically one of the pioneers at the studio. Um, and uh, and so maybe Webster, you could tell us a little bit about Scott, and maybe how you got to know him.
Well, I wouldn't call him, no, not to take anything away from Scott. I wouldn't call him one of the pioneers of the claymation studio because they were
Okay,
a previous sort of generation. The original, sort of founders of the studio and the studio style were Barry Bruce, Don Merkt, Will Vinton, of course, Joan Gratz, Bill Feasterman, um, Mark Gustafson. Um, I'm forgetting a few others: Tom Gasick, Craig Bartlett. Um, and then they expanded gradually when they did Adventures of Mark Twain and Return to Oz. Bruce McKean was there, um, and they got to sort of the that perfect size, like the 8, 9 really talented animators who were also generalists in that they
sure.
could design and build. And that's when they did some of their really their best work that set the stage for them, the explosive expansion, which came later. So that's when they did, the first California raids. They did the Noid, and they did, and that was their old studio in Northwest Portland on Upshur Street. And so I joined during the first expansion after the Raisins hit big. They had a deal to do 5 television specials for CBS plus all the commercials they were doing. And Scott joined, and then there was a second expansion. So that was a giant expansion. They moved into their new office, which was on 22nd Street in Portland, where you visited once or twice,
Yeah.
the red brick building. And and then they had another expansion a few years later, not, uh, sort of a second wave, and that's when Scott joined in. If I recall correctly, and that was like Scott, Sheila Lucas, Shell Hickle. Gosh, there were there was a big, the two big expansions. They brought in about 10 more people each time, and
Oh, okay.
Scott was either between those two expansions or just after I started there in 87. He was about a year or so later, and he was he was a pioneer at the studio in doing sort of a different kind of work, and he was a you know he had his own style right from the start. And I mean, he had his own artistic style, which, as he learned, sort of the more, to refine his technique based on the stuff the studio was doing. You could see that his style, merged in sort of with the studio style. But then also he was a pioneer with Dave Daniels. So Dave Daniels came on board uh, quite a bit later in 93, 94. Dave Daniels moved up from LA to Portland and David had been at Broadcast Arts in New York and had done some really amazing work for Pee Wee's Playhouse, and he had
Mhm.
developed this Stratacut technique, which nobody else did. Oscar Fissinger had experimented with it, and only he could really do it. And then he came to Portland, brought a bunch of and he was also big on motion control, which the studio didn't have a lot of expertise at in terms of the really sophisticated motion control that Dave Daniels was doing. They had done all kinds of motion control, but not these sort of compound moves. And so Dave brought his gear and brought some other gear from a guy named John Sheely, and and actually went into the old Upshur stage and had his own operation there, and he did. And so he was a director for the Vinton studio, and he brought in Scott again. It's confusing because there was a layoff, and I got laid off, and Scott got laid off. But then Dave Daniels came on, and Scott and I had worked separately for Dave Daniels outside the studio in Los Angeles after the initial layoff, which was in like 90 or 91, I think 91. So Scott and I had worked for Dave Daniels. Dave Daniels ends up coming to Portland, and Scott ends up being one of his main guys learning to do Stratacut. And Scott and Hal Hickle's brother, were the two artists who really were able to adopt Dave Daniels' techniques, and I think take it a step further and really and it's really hard. It's a crazy way of thinking, and the two of them were able to do it, and so in that way Scott was really a pioneer, because nobody else and hardly anybody since has been able to do that kind of animation. But
actually I had recently found here on stratacut.com. I don't know if you know, there's actually there's a stratacut.com. Yeah, and they've got an MTV project on there that they did. And I'm not really sure if this is written by David Daniels. It might be. And it's
the one with the cake.
Yeah, the MTV cake, yes.
Yeah.
So I thought, I didn't realize until I found that tonight before the show that he did that.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a stratacut.com. I am going to have to check it out. But David, I think, was the one who had gotten that job and sort of came up with this storyboard. But Scott and John Ashley and Chuck Duke shot that in a little studio in Portland next to a studio I rented on Hoyt Street. It's a long story. But I they shot that.
I was in that little studio.
Right. Yeah. And they had an even tinier studio than I had, and it was just packed with stuff. And they shot that there, and it's pretty cool. It's a really clever use of David was always looking for new ways to showcase the Stratacut. And this, I think, doing it as a cake that is sort of building itself back to a cake backwards with the Stratacut built in was really clever. And Scott and Chuck and John shot that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, most people don't. Yeah, I was gonna say, if anybody out there wants to see some of these, they've got some classical Stratacut videos on stratacut.com, so you can actually see how all that looks. And I believe also, I don't know if you know this also, Webster, but David Daniels uploaded a ton of videos on YouTube explaining the whole process.
Well, I did know about that, and I think I may be partly to blame for some of that, because I made a copy of his. He did a demo. We had a studio open house. I think when Ray Harryhausen was visiting town. For the creative conference, and David Daniels did a whole demo. He had a little table set up, and John Ashley videotaped it, and I made a copy, and I think that might be the copy that
David, got out there.
I don't think I'm not sure if he had a copy or not. Anyway, it's a long story, but I've shown that to some students, and it's really funny because, you can see him building the loaf and then cutting the loaf, and even watching the whole process, you go, how did you, because he actually animates a cube rotating two-dimensionally, but as a three-dimensional cube. It's an image of a three-dimensional cube rotating, but he builds it into a Stratacut loaf, and your brain can't handle that many four-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional trains of thought at once, and students look at that and they just can't. But where Shell and Scott really took it further, because David always wanted to go further, and he wanted to integrate motion control with Stratacut. I mean, he had done it. You can see some of his best things were there's a couple episodes of Pee-wee's Playhouse, particularly the one where it's the 4th of July, and you see this amazing Stratacut sequence where there's the White House and 4th of July, these fireworks go off, and yeah, it's amazing. And then there's the Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. There's the ABC 123 bit that's one long shot with the letters and the numbers building, and it was also shot backwards. And Don Waller, I believe, did the animation of the characters, but it was David's Stratacut, and that's a elaborate motion control shot like David liked to do. Then there was also a really elaborate sequence that David did for the Amnesty International Bill of Human Rights video that was directed by the guy, I can't remember his name now. He directed the first season of Pee-wee's Playhouse, and then there was Well, anyway, to get back to where I was going with Scott, they did a Shell, and finally they got they hadn't gotten a call for many Stratacut commercials at the Vinton studio for David, but they did finally get one for Clearasil, the facial cleanser.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and they built, and so they built these, David Daniels, Shell, Hickel, and Scott built these giant lobes, and they cut it, and they built a motion control sort of conveyor belt and a motion control blade that would slice, where they could sort of dial the increment, the thickness of the slice, really dial it in. And
no kidding.
I believe, yeah, I only saw it a couple of times. I mean, the device, but it was big. And I hope there's pictures of it. I'm sure, well, I was going to say I'm sure Scott has pictures of it, but anyway, so you can find that online, and it's really crazy looking. I mean, it gave the animation a very fluid quality, and you couldn't identify, just like when I saw the Big Time Peter Gabriel Big Time video for the first time, which David also did all the Stratacut and a lot of the other animation for. You can't really identify the technique. Your brain can't wrap it. You can't wrap your head around what you're looking at, but you can tell that it's this very sort of weird, flowy style of animation. So,
yeah, it's really psychedelic.
It's super psychedelic.
I mean, just like you were saying, like a two-dimensional cube, like that's supposed to be three-dimensional at the same time on a 2D surface, and then you're translating that into a long piece of clay with lots and lots of colors pushed together. And
well, to me, it's four-dimensional thinking. It's time and space, although it's two-dimensional space. But you're building time into a three-dimensional object. So it's four-dimensional thinking in my mind.
Yeah, and I wonder how he figures out the speed and how thick to slice it. Like, is he thinking of that beforehand? Like, if I make a 1/8 inch slice. Beforehand.
Yeah, he thinks of it beforehand, and he also adjusts when he's slicing. How. Actually, the greatest piece I think that David ever did with Stratacut is actually something he shot in a tiny little studio. He had a little sort of garage in northern Los Angeles. I can't remember the Eagle Rock, I think, a little town north of L.A. And he had a tiny little studio that was just about the size of a one-car garage, and it was just packed with stuff. And he had this tiny little conveyor belt and three cameras set up, three little Bolexes set up, and it was a little conveyor belt about 6 inches wide and about 2 feet long, and it was made of popsicle sticks, taped together in a long row with guides on either side. And he shot this piece for Sesame Street, 1 to 40. The numbers 1 to 40. It goes 1, 2, 3.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, it's a song. Yeah, you've seen it.
Yep.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. And so that was all shot with like just the crudest setup, or the tiniest setup. It was 16 millimeter, 3 Bolexes. Yeah, he
Yeah,
only
it's,
ended up using one of the 3 angles, but it's just amazing. It's all about the artistry. And
yeah, and I think it's maybe the 3 cameras were for redundancy. Like if one
yeah,
camera didn't work, because that's so much work beforehand that if there's like a light leak or something like that, it's all ruined.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
really amazing. Wow.
So Scott, yeah, Scott was one of David's mentors in that very narrow field of animation, and then also Scott, helped to push the studio in new directions. I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 92 or 93. The studio had this short film contest, and
hmm
they sort of funded post-production. It was a slow time at the studio, and they let people do their own short films using studio space, and they paid for the post-production. So Scott took advantage of that, and in a big way. And then we had a little screening, and there were judges. Joan Gratz was one of the judges, and Scott's film won. And there were about 5 films. John Ashley made a little film. Shel Hickel, I think, made a film. Chuck Duke made a film. Alicia, I can't remember her last name, made a film. And Scott made a film. And Scott's film was really kind of epic and amazing, and included and just clever. And it included Stratacut and stop motion, and it was amazing. It was called Gearhead, and
Yes.
yeah,
Actually, I've got that loaded up. I could play that while
oh
you're
yeah,
talking about it. I can just
sure,
turn the
yeah. Well,
people thing.
that's what I would say about it. Yeah, and so Scott, helped push the studio's, creative boundaries a little bit. There was always a lot of resistance to doing things that were sort of more experimental, but that's understandable, because character animation was their bread and butter. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, and then at some point, see, after, I'm not sure, he and I were both freelancing a bit for the studio for Vinton's between 92 to 94 or 95. My last project there was after I worked on James and the Giant Peach in 95, I believe. And Scott was still there. And then I sort of lost track of him, but I knew he went to LA. And I'm not sure what year the Jurassic Park video was. And I worked on that
Let
as
me
well.
see.
Scott and Mark were super busy, so I, did a few
That
shots with
was
them for.
94, 1994.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So he went to LA to work on that, and uh, and he was co-directing with Mark Osbourne, and Mark. I don't know if Mark had much experience with stop motion before that. Um, and let's see. And then at some point, I'm not sure if Scott stayed in LA or what, but he ended up doing some work for that band Green Jelly, which used to be Green Jello,
Oh, that was
and
his.
they
Okay.
well, it's it's complicated, because the Three Little Pigs video that put Green Jelly on the map, really. I mean, Fred Sturr, did the Three Little Pigs video,
Yeah.
which was, I believe, his first big thing that hit big, and was huge, and it put the band on the map. And then he also did the Tool, Sober video, which put Tool on the map. In my opinion, I don't think, I think it was really his videos that pushed both of those bands forward. But Green Jello, or Green Jelly, got a bunch of funding from the record label to put together sort of a multimedia studio. They had all this money, and they rented a famous building as their studio in Hollywood, and Scott was there for some of that, and Damon Bard actually worked on some of it at another studio. He helped sculpt this giant costume for this character called Orange Crush, and Scott ended up doing the stop motion for a lot of that, and he I guess they released it on video, VHS in the day, as a combination of music videos and some shorts. I have it somewhere, and I can't remember much of the animation, but I mean, I do remember some of the animation. I just don't know quantitatively how much there was. But Scott worked on that, and then he also did some stuff at that time for, this is sort of, I'm getting this secondhand, but he did some work for Kiss. Somewhere there exists, he did a strata cut of Gene Simmons blowing fire, I guess. And, he met them, and there were some stories around that somebody else would have to tell you, because I got only bits and pieces of it secondhand. And then Scott, I sort of lost track of Scott. He ended up going back to Portland to work on the PJs, which would have been about 96, 97, I believe he was there. I'm sure he was there.
Yeah.
And then I lost
Actually,
track of him.
1999 it says here on his filmography was the PJs. It says he was with the animation department. That's all it says.
Maybe he was animating. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But then more recently, I was in touch with Scott because let's say I was moving down to LA, and I had to get rid of a bunch of stuff that I had saved all these years, and he was still shooting. A friend of mine, Guido Musarelli, made a film called the oh God, I can't believe I forgot the name. It's the Island of the Gondoliers, Isle of the Gondoliers, and Scott did a lot of sets and plays a role in the movie. It's a short film. It's really great.
Cool.
And so I sort of got in touch again because I was working with Guido. This is about 2010 or 11, and so I got in touch with Scott again because I had all this stuff, and Scott was still shooting on film, and so he took a bunch of stuff off my hands, like some monkey bone gear and some old Minton gear, an original like wooden track from the early days of the studio. It was a wooden track used on Martin the Cobbler, and still has Barry Bruce's and Bill Feisterman's like handwriting on there. I think it's also used. It was used on a ton of early Vinton stuff. It's sort of and it's made of wood. It's really bizarre. And so he took that off my hands and a few other things. So I was happy for that. And then in 2012, when I did when I was doing the thing for Beats Antique, I hooked him up with Ivan Landau, the director of that whole. Each song for this concert had a different visual, sort of music video to go with it that was projected live during the concert. And so I hooked him up with I hooked up the director with Scott, and he did some sets that were really nice for some of the pieces. And then Scott was going to help me out on Candyman. Actually, he was one of the three, because I was too busy to do the Les Claypool Candyman music video. So Scott was one of the three animators with Edgar and myself. But Scott ended up, that was when he was getting sick. And so that was the last time I saw him, was about a year ago now, when I came back to the Bay Area, and I had to hand off the puppet, one of the puppets, to him. And that was the last time I saw him. And he was starting to, the effects, he was undiagnosed. They didn't know what it was at the time, but he was starting to really feel the effects of this illness, and he just couldn't. It just affected his work it got in the way of his work too much. He wanted to do it, and he did some shots, and one of the shots is in there, but he was just starting to get really sick.
Oh, okay, that's a big shame.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was animating basically his whole career, it sounds like.
Well, he also built models. Like, he worked on the Cicada Princess movie that this guy in the Bay Area made a few years ago. Mauricio Bialchi it was the director, and if you look it up, it's out there. And Scott did a bunch of set work on that, and really gorgeous brickwork. And he actually did one of the artists, a guy named Steve, has a installation piece opening up at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco that Scott also worked on in the last couple of years, and it's also this miniature brickwork that's
Oh,
sort of
okay.
this big tower. So he did construction, like fabrication, uh, of costumes and sets, as well as he was just an all-around artist. There's just no there was no stopping Scott. I mean, like that. I think that's what people that was so what was so I mean, it was really moving to go to his service, and also we Skyped in with the guys in Portland who were having their own little wake at a bar that was right down the street from the old Vinton studio, and a lot of people showed up, and everybody, it's what was so compelling about Scott, I think, was this unstoppable, like fierce, creative energy that you could. It was just that was what was so amazing about him, just that you couldn't stop the guy. You know.
Hmm. Like an
Yeah.
infectious kind of creativity.
I don't know if it was infectious, but you could just, you just admire that sort of spirit. It's hard to. I'm still wrapping my head around it. It's just really an anomaly of creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, there's a oh, actually I've got his I guess let me see, his animation reel playing right now.
Okay.
And he's got this film that he worked on with, I guess, John Ashley, with gargoyles and like a clock tower. Um,
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen the finished film. I remember seeing the sets for that, and I forgot also that Weird Al was one of his patrons. And at some point between, I don't know, before the PJs or after the PJs, I think before the PJs and after Green Jelly, he did a bunch of animation, including the opening titles for this short-lived, like 1 or 2 seasons of this Weird Al comedy show.
hmm Yeah, that's
Sorry, I
right. Weird Al
interrupted.
had like a TV show. Was that on TV or on the internet or something? I can't
No, it
remember.
was it
It's
was it was almost before the internet. It was on television. I don't remember which network, but it was produced by the American Dick Clark. It was produced by Dick Clark, and Dick Clark like made an appearance on at least one episode. And yeah, it was a half-hour show that was on television.
very cool.
Yeah,
I kind
yeah.
of recall it, but I can't remember the. It's like I think I can't remember the details of. But I remember seeing Weird Al like doing funny skits and stuff. But I couldn't. I always thought that was after the internet, but I'm probably wrong there.
I don't know, but I guess it just shows you that Scott was this guy who people would quickly identify. People who had that eye would quickly identify this guy as someone with talent and energy, like real, a real creative sort of gold mine to be tapped if they wanted to. And then there were other people, who, and I was one of these people at one time who were too uptight to get past, to to sort of to let him into their sphere. So I had my issues with Scott early in the old days, we were just kids, and we were all in the same boat. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, we
I
all
think I
had
think
to.
everybody kind of goes through that when you're new to animation and you get in there and you think that you know everything, and that I know that's what I was kind of, when I worked for Gentleman Films. It's like, um, we have a lot to learn and we don't realize that sometimes.
Well, no,
But
I don't. It's not that kind of. I mean, there was that as well. That's one aspect of like the growing pains of those early years. But I'm talking about, just this. It's like you're in the room with a character out of a Charles Bukowski novel in a way, with Scott, and
ah,
and this is a silly comparison because he in a way compared himself to this, because back when I was working with Scott quite closely at the Vinton Studio, I think the Doors movie was coming out, and so and he looked like Jim Morrison. Scott did. I mean, he had the crazy hair, the curly wild hair,
Mm-hmm.
and he was from that area, and he was, sort of this. He's just one of these, like, he just Scott really a larger than life. It sounds cliche, but it was like you just could see that, this kind of crazy energy and very masculine energy, but just very artistic, and for some people that that's something you don't expect to see, to run headlong into, and you don't, by and large, because
Yeah.
unfortunately, like, our our culture and our lack of funding for the arts, we squash all of that. I've only met a few people. I can only think of one offhand who even reminds me remotely of Scott, and that's Danny Antonucci. Um,
Oh.
uh, but
I thought you were gonna say like Bruce Bickford, because Bruce Bickford is kind of a character as well. When you first meet him.
well, it's a different kind of energy, though. I mean, Bruce is
Hmm.
kind of like the there's the tortoise and the hare, and Bruce is the tortoise. I mean, he just goes, he doesn't stop, and he just meticulously just goes and goes. I actually had a discussion with Bruce a couple of weeks ago, and I was reminded, like, how interesting it is to listen to the guy talk. And he's just and he's really funny because he's like, I can't, and it kills me that I can't remember the exact words, but he's like, I need a way to manage my creativity. He gets lost in the details, and he's got all these projects that he is doing all the time, in his head, and he's realizing them, and he just keeps going. He just keeps going and going and going, and just producing, and he hasn't done clay in about 6 years, but he's doing illustrations and animation on paper, and stories. And it's a different kind. It's hard to describe, the kind of energy that Scott had,
Hmm.
and that's what's so devastating to everybody. And I think it's going to take some time to deal with it, because you just don't run into that kind of person in your life much at all. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and I mean, there's only a few people that really, like you say, that can, like do stratacut and sort of carry the torch of that knowledge and maybe even teach it to others. And uh, it's such a rare thing. And now that he's gone now. Oh, um, here's that video you were just talking about. Was it Green Jelly?
Which one? Which green jelly video?
Let's see. It's got that big red monster type character you were
Yeah,
telling me about.
yeah.
Okay.
There was a monster called Toa, Toah, which is a two has two mouths, and that was Scott animated that. I actually did a sculpture of that, which I think you saw, because I was going to animate it at one point
Oh,
remotely
okay.
from Portland, but Scott ended up doing it in LA. And
Okay,
and then there's
yeah.
another monster. There's another monster who's orange, and he's like a giant ball, and Scott also animated a version of that, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, it's neat to see this because I haven't seen it in so long. Um,
It was ages ago. Yeah.
and yeah, so was that foam latex or did he do it in clay like you did?
No, I think it's foam.
In foam? Okay. Wow, that's neat. And yeah, I never really realized that there's a lot of detail in the way that they animated the set too. There's like flowers and stuff and trees and everything is moving. It's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
I haven't seen it in ages, and I'm not in front of. I'm not looking at it as you are, so I'd um, have to do that. Let me think here.
Yeah,
Uh,
you could probably look it up later. It's
oh
called
yeah,
stop motion animation monster, and I guess this is his YouTube channel. Maybe it's Wilson Dot, Wilsondot is the channel. And
Wilson Dot is whose YouTube channel?
I think it might be Scott's because
Oh,
it's got a bunch of his stuff on here.
hmm.
Let me see here. Okay, Green Jelly was the Three Little Pigs. Then, is this the same group? I guess it probably is. I know I've seen this before. Well,
Incidentally, one of the founders of Starburns, the animation studio in LA, was a band member of Green Jelly.
oh, no kidding. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that.
yeah.
So they're all pretty young, at that time probably in the
Yeah,
90s.
I think so. I think so.
Wow, that's cool.
Uh,
And then also, Don Carlson sent me a video that Scott supposedly worked on. Actually, I know he did because he's in the credits, but it's called Ginger and Pickles.
yeah,
And
I didn't know about that, but I saw it on the people talking about it the other day on Facebook or something.
yeah, it seems kind of interesting. It looks like maybe something you'd put on like the Cartoon Network or something just to
Yeah.
take up some time. Or, but I wondered if like the pickle guy was sort of a stop motion version of Scott in some way, because they
Well,
kind of
I
have
have
the
to
same.
say, if you wanted to, one interesting anecdote about Scott. So after the Vinton Studio layoff in 90 or 91, I think it was 91, I rode with Scott and another person from Portland in a little car from Portland to LA to work for David Daniels on a series of commercials he was doing for the California Lottery.
Hmm.
He was rep by a company in LA called Limelight at the time, uh, and it was on the studio was on the corner of Santa Monica and Vine, and I've driven by it many times or walked by it many times. It's a paint store now, and it's so funny. Anyway, it was a video post production house at the time, and they had two little stages. And of course, David brought in all his motion control gear, which almost filled up the whole stage. And I'm talking about the rooms were about 16 by 20, so they were pretty small and stages. And the gear in one of the rooms just filled it up. And they were pretty good, healthy budgets. The budgets in general were bigger back then, and they were pretty healthy budgets. And Scott was doing a little bit of animation on some of them and a lot of model building. We rode down together. I slept on the floor of David Daniels' sister's apartment along with Scott
Wow.
to work on these. And his sister's apartment they sort of shared a lot with three little houses on it. It was a weird lot, and she had a house, and we slept on the floor of the living room, and and so yeah, I got to know Scott pretty well, and so he was hanging around LA one weekend during this job, and he went to a garage sale up in, I think, Beverly Hills, and the guy happened to be a producer, and Scott ended up buying the head of Cujo, the dog from the Stephen King movie.
Okay.
He bought a animatronic stunt head that had a mechanism that lifted the lips back from the teeth, and it was a fiberglass underskull, and there was a little bit of foam latex and fur left on it, and it was huge, and I should have brought that picture I have a picture of that. I should have brought it to the memorial service, but yeah, he bought the head of Cujo for almost nothing.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, funny.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people that get into stop motion and do freelance, well, I don't know what it's like today. I guess it's different, but back in the 90s, it seems like that, sleeping on floors in very small spaces was pretty commonplace. Even me, I slept at Gentleman Films. I actually slept in their small studio house that they had, and I mean the place was like infested with cockroaches and
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
and it's like this
How are the
really.
cockroaches in North Carolina? Are they bigger than the LA cockroaches? Because we had the place, Dave's sister's place, had cockroaches too,
They
and they
were
were
pretty
huge.
large. They were very large, and if you sprayed them with that bug spray,
They
um,
didn't care.
they well, they would actually like scream. They'd go "Arr, arr," like literally, like it's not even joking. They would make all these noises like they're suffering, and you felt horrible when you did it.
Oh,
So uh, yeah, it was crazy. And one time I sculpted this super sculpey cockroach, like realistic, and put these like wire legs on there and stuff, and I put it on Mike Rosinski's desk, his animation desk, and he freaked out, and it was a big dramatic outcome because I scared him so bad, and then he tried to get me back and like took it and put it in the fridge, and so it was like an ongoing joke about the cockroaches, but they were
yeah.
gigantic
Yeah,
cockroaches,
southern.
the
I
scary
wonder how
kind.
big. Yeah, I wonder how big the southern cockroaches are in comparison with the LA cockroaches. I suspect the southern ones are bigger, but that the LA ones are tougher.
You
Because
think
there
so?
was one, yeah, there was one cockroach that was just huge one night, and I don't remember Scott was up, but I chased it around and I hit it with something and it didn't kill it. Like it was just its armor was so hard. It looked different than the standard really fast cockroaches. It was bigger and slower and it had thicker shell. It was like a little tank. But yeah.
That's
Uh,
funny.
one of the animators you worked with at John Lemon Films is in LA at Stupid Buddy Studios, or he has been for a number of years. I think it's Tom Smith, is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice guy. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, I had seen some pictures of him online, and I almost hear nothing about him. It seems like. Uh, is
I
he?
actually haven't met him in LA, but I knew he was there on stage. I worked there briefly in 2014 on some things for the WWE. It was really fun, um, but I had to leave to go to work on something at Shadow Machine, and Tom was there, but I never got a chance to meet him. But yeah, he's there.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. If you get the chance to, he taught me when I went to Gentleman Films. This is before I guess I met like you and John Ashley. Maybe I'm not really sure. But nobody ever explained to me how you make brass and lead wire armatures.
Mm.
And when I first got the job at Gentleman Films, I didn't know much about it. So Mike Rosinski was like, "Well, you just take, you solder these parts together and everything." And he actually had a box of uh, all the brass parts for a character named Henry Cycle,
Yeah.
and all I had to do is essentially cut the wire and assemble it. But what I didn't realize was that when you put lead wire into a square brass tube, a round piece of wire in a square tube means that it's gonna spin basically. So
Hmm.
I put this thing together and I sculpted Henry Cycle, from scratch with Primo clay or Pongo clay, and
Hmm.
when I was done, he started to animate it and he set it all up and everything seemed fine. And the wires twisted inside those square tubes and ruined his shot. So he was,
Did you
he was,
not?
yeah, I ruined his shot out of my
No, but did you
ignorance.
not? Did you not solder the wires in there?
No, because Mike Rosinski told me to use hot glue, which is another
Oh,
big
well, that's the
mistake.
problem. Yeah, because we
Yes.
always used, the standard lead wire in the brass tubes, but of course we soldered them in there, so there was no way they were coming out. But
Yeah.
I would never do that. It's funny that the Vinton Studio, and it's funny that you guys came sort of separately came up with the idea to use lead, because I know
Mm,
there
nope,
wasn't
no.
much.
It
No,
wasn't
what?
separate. It wasn't separate.
Oh.
I think Joel Brinkerhoff worked for Vinton. Was it Joel
Oh, yeah,
Brinkerhoff?
yeah. Joel was there. Yeah.
So he worked there, and I think that's either him or Tom Smith were the people to bring that knowledge to Gentleman Films. So, but Mike Rosinski didn't really study what Tom Smith was doing when he built Henry Cycle. So I think he didn't realize like what was involved in terms of the mechanics. Because Tom Smith would be hired on to basically build and fabricate stuff and then do the animation. And actually, what Tom Smith taught me was that when you had that round lead wire, you crimp the end to where it flattens, and then when you shove it down inside that square tube, those flat edges are gripping the side of the angular innards of the brass tube. So that was I think he did that and then hot glued it, and it actually works pretty good. But they had like a special hot glue that was like an industrial hot glue gun. It wasn't the same as like if you go to a craft store. Those are like a low temperature hot glue, which is a lot softer than what they were using. They had something that turned almost into like an epoxy after you heated it up and injected it, and when it cooled, it was really super hard. So different technique, but it did work, believe it or not.
I would just never recommend the lead wire over aluminum, these days. I think for I just wouldn't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think anybody else is doing that either. I think it's too toxic and just bad for the environment, that you're.
It's just I only use lead for things like a tie is a classic example. Like if you wanted to use like strip lead, for something like a tie, it would work well if you painted it, but only for little things like that. I would never use it for an actual character armature.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you guys were working, I guess you and Scott were working on that Weird Al project. What was that called again?
Well, you mean the Jurassic Park music video or the series? I didn't work on the series.
Jurassic Park. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it actually called? It was called. Oh, okay. It was actually called Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it was actually called Jurassic Park, but it was based. It's pretty obscure. I mean, not that obscure, but it was based on MacArthur Park, the Donna Summer song, which is kind of obscure, I guess. And actually, I believe, if I recall correctly, Jurassic Park, the music video, was aired on primetime television. In its premiere.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I don't remember what the context was, but I seem to remember that it was on one of the main networks in prime time.
I'm gonna see. I might have a picture of your dinosaur with the salt shaker here. I'm gonna try to dig that up in my historic picture gallery here, so I can show people.
I just did a few shots in because they were so busy in LA.
Yeah. But still, it's pretty neat that.
I guess it was a heat wave, and there was some video that Mark Osbourne posted of Scott animating, and he's just sweating like crazy. It was so hot down there.
Oh yeah, I saw that. So here I'm showing everybody your dinosaur and salt shaker, and there's like a guy that I guess he bites him in half.
Yeah, he eats the guy. Yeah,
that's neat. And I guess your puppet's kind of falling apart. Like his arm has missing clay and stuff, but they can still kind of get the gist of it.
Oh, this is an old shot. This is a shot of it after the animation. Is that what you're showing?
Yeah, it definitely is. There's like 3 different angles, and this is, I guess, when you sent this to me a long time ago. I think you had built a garage in your backyard or something, and you took everything out and you set it up, and I guess you were unboxing all this stuff. And there's like your orange dinosaur and your Nick Jr. puppets, and if you can't see it, it's kind of hard to know what I'm talking about, but
sounds pretty sad.
Yeah, it's in pretty bad shape.
But yeah, Scott, the work that Scott did on that was really cool. I mean, he cast all the foam puppets, and they had a really sort of sophisticated. The main character was this giant T-Rex, and he was super cartoony, And I think Scott sculpted and did the casting and ran the foam.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty impressive. Yeah,
I'm gonna see if
and
I
that's
can
the thing.
find
Like
it.
Scott was, I don't know where he learned all this stuff, but he he came to the studio with knowledge of like foam latex and stuff. He had.
No kidding.
Yeah, he one of the things. Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, he one of the projects that Scott worked on at the Vinton studio his shortly after starting there was the Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. He actually was the only guy at the time at the studio who could run foam, and so they were going to bring on. We were so busy. And we had so much animation to shoot. They were looking to bring on Peter Kleinow from LA, who goes way back, to do some additional animation. And Peter wanted to do. He doesn't really do clay, so he wanted a foam latex, puppet for the Speed Demon character, the Michael Jackson Spike the Rabbit character. Okay. So he sent an armature. He got an armature fabricated. And he sent it up to Portland. I don't remember if Scott did the sculpt, but there had to be a special sculpt made over the armature of the Spike the Rabbit to be cast in foam. Scott may have done the sculpt, but he ran the foam for sure, and he did the paint job on that. And then Peter Kleinow came up from LA and was shooting with it. He got about like 28 frames into it, and the armature broke.
Ooh.
Yeah, so Peter went back to LA, but we ended up continuing to use the puppet, and I believe that might have been the first foam latex puppet that I had ever worked with. And Scott had cast it. I'm not sure who fixed the armature, maybe Charlie Raywalt, but yeah.
So did Peter's shot ever, did he actually get any completed shots at all, or was it
No, it was just, it broke after, I think, literally 28 frames.
Oh, man. That's frustrating.
Yeah, it was like one of the pins on one of the balls came undone, but
Yeah,
he was just coming up he was just gonna shoot a bunch of stuff real quick. Like, he came up for a couple of days and he just went right back. I don't even think I met him at the time. I thought of him as he was a legend, and then I got to know him much later. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I guess he worked on like Terminator, and I remember he had a website with like was it like a Chihuahua or something, and he's in like a Hawaiian shirt and playing music like on a accordion or something. It was.
Well, he's a famous he was a famous musician as well as an animator.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, right now I've got this video loaded up, and it looks like there's some clay on glass in that Jurassic Park video too.
Yeah. I'm not sure if they did any in LA, but we did some clay and glass in the basement. You might recognize my painting style on the rib. There's a shot of a rib cage where the Weird Al gets swallowed up, and I painted the ribs inside. You're inside the dinosaur's belly.
Oh,
and there's
okay.
A stand that says like selling souvenirs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. The kind of like a nerdy kid. I can recognize your style.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
All right. And did Mike McKinney do a shot with the Energizer thing there, like the Dino-gizer? Was that?
It might have been. Yeah. I as I recall. Yeah. Now that you mention it, not only Scott and Mark had tapped me to do some subcontract some shots, But he had also had a sort of a second unit or third unit at that little studio on Upshur Street, and John Ashley, Gerald Howard, and Chuck Duke were shooting shots there. One of which was the live action scene. One of them is live action of a hand coming in and lighting the gate, lighting the candles at the gate to Jurassic Park. They built a miniature of the front gate.
Yeah.
And I think one of the shots was the helicopter receding into the distance at the end of the piece, and then the shot that Mike McKinney may have animated of the Energizer Bunny. Yeah, they had another unit up at it was actually John Ashley's little studio. He rented in that building.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah, it was so funny that this project got so huge, you know?
I mean, it's actually overall well done. I mean, it's a lot of mixed media and different techniques and styles, but um, it's fun. I think that's the thing. It's really kind of a fun thing to watch, and it's quirky, and well, I guess it's a Weird Al thing, so everything kind of falls into that category with him. But
I think it was super ambitious for the time, especially because it was all shot on film. Any little light leak and you were toast.
right now, how did they do there's like there's these dinosaurs in some cages, and it's like they're a mirror image of one another, and behind them there's some sort of digital it looks like somebody's twirling like a
Yeah, those are go-go dancing dinosaurs, and they were clay on glass. And Shel Hickle shot those at my place, if I recall.
oh, okay. And so how did you guys do the mirroring process? Being that this is on film, was it like a post production trick, or let's see. I don't know. I guess if you can't see it, it's oh, I think we lost Webster. Yeah, and Nick was saying here that maybe he thought you were booted from the show for copyright reasons. Because
Why is that?
YouTube is really strict about that kind of stuff. Sometimes
Mm.
they'll kick you off your show and send you a warning.
Wow.
Oh, the Three Little Piggies videos. That oh, okay. Sorry, Thomas. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't been following the comments. So I guess that was from Thomas was saying that question was referring to a long time ago. So, all right. Well,
Okay.
anyway, Webster, again, thanks for coming on. I guess, my condolences. And, I know a lot of you guys are, of course, sad for losing Scott. So I just want to, I'm sorry for that. And I guess maybe if you want to come on in the future, you're always welcome. And thanks again for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, of course. And I think it'll take a long time to sort of, you know how it is when you lose somebody that you maybe were close to or weren't close to, or you hadn't seen him in a while. I mean, it wasn't a surprise for me because I knew Scott was sick. It was still a surprise, but you know, it sort of confirmed my worst fears when he passed.
Hmm.
Um, but when you lose somebody like that, you don't. It's a shock at first, and then after years pass, you miss him more. So we could talk about Scott again, when we've all had time to process it in the years to come, and maybe somebody will put some kind of tribute website together or something. That would be great because, like with Fred Sturr, it would be really great if somebody were to properly archive or retransfer his footage to HD. I have to do the same for Hua Chang. I have a bunch of Hua Chang's films, and I need to properly telecine those. I'm
Hmm.
taking reasonably good care of them, making sure they don't shift in
Absolutely.
color, in heat or cold. But it's just one of these things when an artist dies, and a filmmaker and an animator, it's sort of up to the rest of us to carry their work forward because there's really nobody else that's going to do it.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when Gary Bialki passed away a long time ago, and I thought about the same thing. I thought, who knows Gary, and can we put a site together for him, and and try to preserve his work and all. And I made an effort there just because I really thought, he was one of my main influences for my
Yeah.
sculpting,
Yeah.
and I thought he was like the most ultimate sculptor, and
Oh yeah.
I just really loved seeing his characters. Like when I was in the studio and I saw these puppets, those puppets looked like they were living, and
Yeah.
it
His
always
stuff is
struck me as like, this is amazing.
yeah.
So, in the future, I did try, I guess, Will Feisterman,
Bill Feasterman. Yeah.
Bill Feisterman, yeah. Um, I asked him, and he's very protective about giving out the information of his family. Like, I think because he doesn't really know me and everything, but he's one of the people that I thought, if he's like able to actually catalog what Gary did, or find photos, or some sort of a portfolio that he had, he'd be the perfect person to put something together. But
I don't think Bill's the guy for that. He may not even have that stuff. He, what we. It's hard to know, other than Will himself, where that stuff, who would have ownership of that stuff. It'd be really great to find the stuff that Gary did for Dinosaurs Attack, because those dinosaurs were awesome.
oh, really?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've only seen a picture like of a couple of them. I mean, I saw the real sculpts, and I know they took all kinds of pictures of them, and I don't know where they are, but somewhere they exist.
Well, I know Will Vinton was trying to make like a Frog Prince Broadway play, and
Yeah.
I don't know if I interviewed him a long time ago on my old live stream channel before I used YouTube, and he was trying to pitch that at the time, and I never asked him about Gary Bielke, and all that kind of stuff when I had the chance, but I probably should have. In hindsight, I probably should have asked him, but I don't. I think that that project flopped for him, the Broadway version.
I don't know. He might still be doing something like that. There's a guy doing a documentary about Will right now. Mark. I can't remember his last name offhand, but he interviewed myself and Scott, Chuck Duke, and Hal Hickel a few weeks ago, separately, down here in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, getting a few updates about Will, and I think maybe one of those musical projects is still alive and kicking.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. Yeah, in regards to the Garrett stuff, I mean, I think because it's a little bit easier to catalog and archive photographs than it is moving pictures. So I have a feeling that Gary's stuff will emerge over the years, because it's just photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be
John
awesome.
Ashley, for instance, John has thousands and thousands of photographs. So maybe somebody will, maybe he will scan those and put them out there someday. So we'll see.
That would be cool. I think I'm friends with him on Facebook, but I don't think he's
not very active.
Yeah, he's pretty reclusive in all aspects of life, even on the internet, it seems. I've tried to message him, but
maybe Will, has an entire archive of Dinosaurs Attack stuff that is just sitting there in his vault. So we'll see.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I mean, maybe, yeah, who knows? But I think that if people saw most of those puppets, they would be inspired to almost bring that whole style back, just because it's so beautiful. Or I think it's beautiful, but I think it's not so.
I do too. I would hope so. But, our maybe more because of the live action than anything, I think our Michael Jackson, Les Claypool music video didn't hit big, it didn't sort of kick into high gear on its viewership. So it's hard to say. I mean, I still believe in the art form, and I'm doing some clay right now for a show. But yeah, it's hard to say where, who's going to be its next patron and for what, you know.
Yeah, and it seems like Michael Jackson and stop motion are uh, the topic comes up a lot. I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast, and somebody brought that up, that Michael Jackson seemed like a living clay animation character, and I was like, I wonder if they know that he was a California raisin at one time, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And it's like, um, and then they're doing a Bubbles the chimp stop motion feature supposedly, which has been, I don't know if there's any updates on that, but a couple of months ago I think I posted that they're making a feature film about
Yeah,
that.
Starburns has talked about that. Yeah,
Is it Starburns? Okay.
Starburns
Uh,
will be doing that. Yeah, but that it's a script that was floating around Hollywood. It was on a list of it's sort of this yearly contest of like the weirdest scripts in Hollywood that are sort of floating around, and that was one of them, and and they announced Starburns announced that was a feature they were going to try to get funding
that's
for, but I don't think
interesting.
they've started.
Yeah, it might be like that Pinocchio feature that they were talking about too, which I know they did a lot of for. Is it, how do you say his name? Guillermo del
Guillermo
Toro or
del
something?
Toro, yeah,
Yeah.
that has actual. I've seen the production art for that. I mean that is further along than I believe than the Starburns project.
Well, it looks
The
beautiful. I mean, from what I've seen, they've
yeah,
actually got, I think, a few prototype puppets they made for that, and some sketches. It looks really fantastic. And somebody interviewed him and said it was like, on the back burner for other more like profitable projects. I think it's more like a money issue. So, but hopefully, yeah. I mean, there's so many things that I'm looking forward to. But in terms of clay, there's nothing really. I think Aardman might be like the only studio that still kind of utilizes clay, but even they are using a lot of CG and replacements and things that are printed, and um, it's not really the same,
yeah.
as clay.
Well, there's Mike Mort, who's doing Night of the Chuck Steele Night of the Trampires, and I'm a big fan of his. He's the guy who used to do that Gogs show on Nickelodeon, ages ago. And you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and he did that great. And he's hardcore clay. I mean, it's stop motion and it's with real sets, but I mean the faces are clay and it's sculpted. It's about the sculpture. So I'm very excited about that. And
Yeah, I forgot about that. And see, I
yeah.
wonder though if that's somehow enhanced digitally, or is that actually, uh, like.
Well, I mean, it's why not use the digital tools? I mean, I don't think he's sculpting the faces in any way digitally.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
see it
I
here.
don't know. It's still done by hand, but I use After Effects myself, or just I use any kind of comp tool I need to clean up things like cracks in the clay that distract you from the face and things like that. I mean, there's no reason not to do that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's true.
but uh, but yeah, I think it's just hardcore clay animation that he's doing over there. It's very exciting that he got that off the ground. I understand the budget's pretty low, but
Yeah, I mean it's for a low budget. It's pretty much better than anything. You know, I mean it's pretty comparable to Aardman actually for a low
oh yeah,
budget.
totally, totally, yeah. And all the work he's done over the years, he did that commercial for some hair product that was with these cavemen. It was just excellent. He's really good. He's a great director. It just happens to be that clay is his medium, or
Right.
stop motion. It's a
Yeah,
combination
yeah.
of clay and puppet. So yeah, there's stuff going on. It's just you have to show what can be done before people before people want to see more, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they want to know where their money's going in a sense. So, have you ever considered like a Kickstarter project or anything? I've seen
Yeah,
some successes out there lately.
up to this point, I've wanted to be part of Kickstarter projects, and I've been part of Kickstarter projects. I'd rather not do the labor of maintaining the Kickstarter thing, but
Mhm.
I have about three main like Kickstarter plans that I have had on the back burner for a number of years. Yeah. So it could, there may come a day, and I don't know, maybe soon, where I do that. But I don't want it to fail. So I want to put a lot of, I want to put a lot of thought into it before I were to do it. And I have three projects that are my candidates for Kickstarter.
That's cool. That's awesome. I mean, just
I'm not going to do it unless the situation either is necessary or presents itself in terms of my overall schedule. I'm probably going to, I have CG work to do if there's not enough clay work, but if I don't know. I'm not sure when I'm going to launch those. So someday I'm going to do at least one. But up until that point, there's other Kickstarter projects that are happening. That there's a new music video that I'm working on for Beats Antique that they're going to do a Kickstarter for that. There's a low budget horror feature that I'm actually really excited about. That Ralph Cordero is sculpting a monster that I'm going to animate for it.
oh, I've seen him working on that. It looks amazing.
It's awesome, and they're going to do a Kickstarter for that. I'm going to do some shots, for the Kickstarter, so that people can see and get excited about the animation. So yeah, up until this point, I would just rather be featured in the Kickstarter. Like, hey, you get more animation if you donate, rather than being the guy who's going. It's like karma, like I have donated to some Kickstarter projects, and I know that once I put mine out there, I'm going to knock back on those same doors that knocked on my, the same people who were begging me for money. I'm going to wait, did I get that right? The same people who I gave money to, I'm going to, hit them up.
Yeah, yeah. No, you got it right.
Kickstarter karma, that should work, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to go begging for money until I'm good and ready, and I don't want it to fail. So I don't have immediate plans to do that.
Well, you need to buy about 3 more of those metal containers and stack them up, and expand your business a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the working in the container here, it's the perfect size. I just love it, and I can scale up. Like I've got 2 containers right now because I had Justin Cohn here doing some animation for one of the pieces I'm doing for Shadow Machine, and so that's great. It's the perfect size for a stage. It's 8 by 20, and that's about exactly the right space for a stop motion stage. So I currently have 2 stages, and I'm going to scale down. Unless I'm super busy, once I finish these 2 projects. But if I need to, in theory, I can just rent more containers and scale up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's ideal, yeah.
Now, can you buy because I was looking at some pictures online, and there's people that build actual living space, like houses out of them with stairs and sliding glass doors and stuff. And
yeah, it's a whole thing. It's a whole sort of movement because there's so many of these containers. There's in Oakland, because it's a major shipping port, they're stacked up 6 or 7 stories, 6 or 7 containers high, and they're for sale. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of people doing really amazing stuff architecturally with them.
Yeah, and I mean it just works out perfect for stop motion. And Don Carlson also and I were kind of contemplating why don't we see these where we live, and I'm suspecting that the reason why people in the Midwest don't have them is because of the cold weather. Now, in LA and San Francisco, does it ever get below 70 degrees there? Or, I mean, how cold does it get?
It gets cold, but not, in LA especially, it almost never freezes.
Ah, okay.
Up San Francisco, it gets quite cold and does freeze. But it's really with the containers, it's really the heat you have to worry about because they have no, space insulation space up above, so they're like ovens in the sun. But I have an air conditioning unit now, and it's great. It's a tiny space, so you don't need much to control the temperature.
Awesome,
Heat or
awesome. Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember how big John Lemon Films, they built like a shed in the back of their house, and it was probably about, I'm gonna say, maybe 30 feet long by maybe 10 foot wide, and they had like one partition in the side of the room that had a door, and so the back part had no windows or anything like that, and they had one air conditioner in there. And yeah, I guess you're right, because it doesn't take much to cool or heat a space like that, so
yeah.
it might actually be feasible.
And like Ray Harryhausen shot his early films in his little, what he called his hobby house that his dad built him in his backyard, and he shot all of the shorts that, Little Red Riding Hood and the Tortoise and the Hare and the King Midas. He shot all those in a little shed in his backyard.
No kidding.
In his early days, yeah. And he even did some professional. I mean, those are fairly professional, but he even did some contract work back there. Yeah, yeah.
That's neat. Yeah, it's so awesome in a way. Like, I wonder if anybody's ever preserved his animation space back there, and
I have to get back to my animation here. I'm sorry, we were supposed to wrap this up. I'm sorry, I'm the one babbling on, but
oh, that's okay. That's okay.
okay.
Yeah. So again, Webster, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk again.
Okay.
All right,
Always
Webster.
a pleasure.
Okay. See ya.
Bye.
All right. So, anyways, everybody, that was Webster, and I guess that was about, how long was that show? Pretty long, about an hour and 20 minutes. Wow. All right. So, if you guys have any questions about anything, or you want to present any topics for our next live show, you can do so by emailing me at mark@animateclay.com. All right. See you guys all next week.